Aspetta, c'è più sulla chiesa. Prima? Tutti più lontano sorry. Lasciamo farlo vedere un minuto di
Can I change right now? Yep. Thank you.
Welcome to the Octo-Finals of the World Schools Debating Championship 2008. The topic for this debate is, this House believes that heads of government would need a parliamentary majority to govern. Each speaker will have 8 minutes to present a constructive speech, and either the first or second speaker for each team will present a 4-minute reply speech. After the first minute, a bell will sound, and points of information may be offered. After the 7th minute, a bell will sound, and no further points of information may be offered. The bell will ring 2 times at the end of 8 minutes. The bell will ring once after 3 minutes of the reply speech and twice after 4 minutes. There are no points of information during the reply speeches. There is no verbal interaction between the audience and the debaters during the debate. At the end of the debate, the judges will leave their completed ballots and leave the room to discuss their decision. They will return to the room and one of them will give a brief explanation about the debate. The proposition in this round is Team Slovenia. The first proposition speaker is Zan. The second proposition speaker is Anya. And the third proposition speaker is Philip. The reply speech will be given by Zan. The opposition in this round is Team Israel. The first opposition speaker is Moshe. The second opposition speaker is Batfiu. And the third opposition speaker is Benji. The reply speech will be given by Moshe. The judges for this round are Todd Golding from Australia, Jeremy Johnson from New Zealand, Jess Prince from Qatar, Erin Butt from Canada, and Neha Prakash from Singapore. Please welcome. I would now like to introduce the first speaker for the proposition, Zan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable panel of judges, dear friends. This debate today is about what kind of system ensures that we get the best of the best leading our governments. What kind of a system ensures that we get the best people leading our nation, leading our state, leading our governments? Now, the theme line of side proposition today is simple. We would like to advocate policy politics instead of personality politics. And we would like to argue that theme line in 3 major points of analysis. The first 2 will be discussed by me, and we'll firstly talk about the checks and balances, secondly about the accountability, and then in our second speech we'll talk about how implementing our policy today will ensure a better decision-making process. But before we start with that, let's just take a look at a few definitions. Now firstly, heads of governments. These are the prime ministers that actually lead the governments themselves. Now, we see majority vote as a qualified majority vote. And the policy side proposition we'd like to advocate today is that when a prime minister is actually elected by the people or simply appointed or through whatever process there is, we say that the last step in this election needs to be done by the parliament itself, having a vote to whether accept this person as a prime minister or to refuse him as a prime minister. Now, this voting would be anonymous to allow cross-party voting in these cases. A good example of where this is done is when we're actually advocating or appointing the EU parliamentary president, where he has to go through the same process as side proposition today wants to advocate. Now, moving on to our first major point of analysis, which is the checks and balances. Now, generally speaking, what side proposition would say today is that people are inherently motivated to be swayed by big smiles, swayed by personality checks, swayed by people, swayed by politicians who actually do not have the qualifications but appeal to our emotions, appeal to our big smiles, as I'm doing right about now. What we say on side proposition is that that isn't happening all the time, but what side proposition is not willing to do today is not willing to take a risk of a prime minister being head of state, just a second, madam, I will take you, without actually having the proper qualifications or having the proper experience. Yes, madam?
The people have a right to vote however they want and with whatever accounts they want. How are you to decide that they're wrong?
Okay, we're not saying you can't vote by these limits, you can't vote at all. What we're saying is that the last process needs to be a parliamentary vote, because we say that these people in the parliament are professionals, have and know the complexity of the job this prime minister would have to do, and are aware that that position is important. Now, according to our policy, two things can happen. A, the people elect a prime minister who is responsible, who has experience, and who can lead the government. Now, the only thing we would do is just have another vote, and if this person is indeed qualified, responsible, and would be able to be in charge of the government, we just have another vote in the parliament that would do so. But B, if we appoint someone who would not be willing to do the tasks that a prime minister would have to do, would not do in the best interest of our government, our policy today ensures that that person does not get the power. Our policy today ensures that just because I smile a lot and have no power, have no experience whatsoever, that I would be able to lead a government. And moreover, when we elect a government, we give it the ability to affect our lives. We give it the ability to decide about our healthcare, about our taxes, about our education. We say electing the prime minister of the government is just as important as these issues, and the parliament itself should have a vote, should have a say of who will be the prime minister or who will lead the government as such. And furthermore, by doing what we want to do today, by actually advocating our policy, by voting for side proposition, you will be voting for an atmosphere where we will have a bigger chance of having more responsible governments, of having more responsible ministers, prime ministers. Now, our second major point of analysis in this debate is the accountability factor. Now, when something goes wrong in a government, what side proposition sees today as a problem is the shifting of guilt by the prime minister and the government of the parliament itself. We see that shift of responsibility comes because we do not have democracies that are truly accountable for all that actions, because the prime minister just says, it was their fault, you elected me. The government itself says, no, you elected him, so it's his fault. We see that, just a second, sir, we come to a shift of guilt which is inherently bad. Yes, sir?
You said the parliament can cross party line in order to vote for a leader which isn't of their parliament. So you're not actually arguing the motion, because there can still be a parliament with a leader from another power and party.
I'm not really sure what you meant by that point, but what I think you meant is that if, according to our policy, where we have anonymous voting, that would lead to the bigger disaster. However, what side proposition likes to advocate today with anonymous voting is that we would actually be able, that these people in the parliament would not be bound to vote for the person that is in his party, but would be bound only to elect and vote for the person that would be qualified in their own perspective. Now, moving on with this major point of analysis. Now, when a vote of no confidence occurs from the people to a government, neither the prime minister or the government itself is taking the blame. It's shifting the guilt as such. But what we say on side proposition is that by advocating our policy, we have the government actually having a say in who is the prime minister, and thus extinguishing the factor that they did not have a say, extinguishing the factor that they were not able to influence who is actually deciding, who is actually in charge. Now we see that as a good thing, because there's no more hiding behind the veil. There's no more shifting of guilt. There's no more shifting of responsibility. What side proposition says today is that by allowing the parliament to have a say, a decent say, a qualified say, an anonymous say for that matter, we say that that will impact in a way that a simple election cannot, in a way that would ensure that the best of the best get to the big spots, that the best of the best are the ones who will talk about healthcare, are the ones who will talk about our education, that the best of the best are the ones who will talk about our future education, the future of our children. And that is what this debate boils down to for side proposition. Either choosing the best of the best, or allowing, even if by a small risk, even if there's a 0.0% risk of me getting to be in parliament, getting to be a prime minister because of my smile, is something side proposition today is not willing to accept. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 1 second.
I would now like to introduce the first speaker for the opposition, Moshe, to open the speech.
According to the logic we just heard from side proposition, as long as I smile prettily, all of you will believe everyone. However, all the democratic nations of the world today, all the democratic governments and all the philosophers who spoke up on behalf of democracy believe differently. They believe that the people know what's best for them, that the people have the right to decide, and that power should not be allowed to be held in the hands of the few. Now, we'll be going on and explaining this issue of the rationale of democracy later on in our case. Before I refute what we've heard so far, I'll just explain what that case is going to be. We'll be providing you with 3 levels of analysis on why the motion should fall. First of all, we'll be providing analysis on the different roles of the executive and legislative branches in the government, and why it's sometimes very important that different parties be represented in these branches. Secondly, we'll be explaining why effective decisions don't need a majority of the government in the parliament. And thirdly, we'll be explaining why the overall stability of decisions that are reached even without a majority can be very, very strong. But before I do that, I'd just like to move on to refutation for a moment. We have 2 main issues with the proposition's case so far. The first has to do with really what we should be discussing today, what the motion really meant, and the second is the issue of the plan that they brought up. So first of all, we'd just like to say that we don't believe that proposition is really arguing what the motion intended. Because under their plan, Parliament, according to them, the Parliament simply has to vote in the leader that the people has elected. However, a Parliament could still elect a leader who is of a different party than it has a majority in the Parliament currently. For example, if we have a Republican majority in the Parliament and a Democratic candidate has been elected by the people, the Republican majority in the Parliament could still elect this leader into power because we have anonymous voting, etc., etc. So we could still end up with a situation where we have a leader in power with a majority of the opposite party in the Parliament. And that's really the issue we thought we were discussing today. So we'd just like to point that out, that the issue that proposition has brought up, no thank you, isn't really at the center of the debate. But you know what? We're going to argue it anyway. And that's what I'm about to do right now. Moving on to the issue of their plan. Now, they attempted to justify this extra step that they wanted to put into the elections by saying that the people are only swayed by smiles, and the government, and only the Parliament, no thank you, knows what's really right. And we have 3 answers to that, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, as I said at the beginning of my speech, the whole point of democracy, is that the people know what's best for them, that the people are allowed to choose one moment. So how can we take that away from them? And we also have to ask, the parliament members are elected by the people. Why are we trusting the people to elect the parliament members, but not trusting them to elect the main leader? We have a slight contradiction here, please.
Sir, you're clearly misrepresenting what side proposition was saying today. What we say is that when the people elect a prime minister, that prime minister, before going to power, has to go through a parliamentary
Thank you.
vote.
I understood your plan. Basically what you're saying is that the parliament can single-handedly negate the will of the people and say, no, the people have chosen a leader, but they're wrong. We know better than all the people in our country. The second answer we have to that plan is, why won't the parliament be swayed by this president's smiles too? Where is the parliament's secret source of ultimate knowledge that lets them know who the perfect leader is? No, thank you. And that the people don't apparently have access to. The members of parliament are human too, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, we just have to say, members of parliament should have a say in who the leader of the country is, who the leader of the executive branch is. But they can do that by voting in the general election, just like every other citizen, ladies and gentlemen. We shouldn't be giving them more rights, no thank you, than all the other citizens in a democracy. So no thank you. Now that I've explained why the proposition's plan isn't really the best, let's move on to our side of the house. We'll be explaining to you why sometimes it's good, well, I'll just start with the first level of analysis. The analysis on the different roles of the executive and legislative bodies. Now, I'd just like to begin by repeating that the rationale of democracy is that there should be as much control as possible in the hands of the people, that the people should decide. Now, this is achieved in a democracy through representation. The people vote for whoever they think will best represent their interests. So basically, the goal of every democratic system is to put as much power and control as possible in the hands of the people. Now, let's take a look at the scenario that we're debating about today. So the people have elected a leader that the government does not, that the parliament, the majority of the parliament apparently does not support. And let's keep in mind that this parliament was also elected by the people. Now, in a case such as this, it's obvious that the people had different considerations when voting for the leader and when voting for the members of parliament. Let's take a look at what these considerations were. Now, when you go to vote for the leader of the executive branch, the leader of the nation, you have a number of considerations. You have, first of all, you do have personality. You have whether this person is a strong leader, a person who can correctly represent the ideals of your nation in the eyes of the world. You also have more political issues, such as issues of national security, issues of foreign policy. These are issues that the leader of the executive branch deals with himself. And those are the issues that someone has to take into consideration when voting for the executive branch. But there are a completely different set of considerations that someone has when voting for the legislative branch. We have more local concerns, issues of domestic policy. And the reason for this is because you vote for your senator based on what state you live in. No, thank you. Actually, you know what? One moment. Based on what state you live in, and therefore he deals with more local issues. So we have a completely different set of considerations, and we believe that you should be able to vote for these two different bodies based on your different considerations. Please.
At this point, I kindly ask you to stop focusing on the United States of America and take a look at Europe and other democracies which do not have the same system that you're proposing. They do not have.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Sure. Let's take a look at Britain. In Britain, we have a number of parties, not just two, but the same principle still applies because the parliament is still elected on a regional level. The MPs, the members of parliament, still represent different zones within the country, and they're elected by the members of those areas. So the principle that members of parliament represent more local issues and not national issues of security and foreign policy still apply. But thank you for your request. All right. So basically, what the proposition's plan is doing is forcing the citizens to align, no thank you, all their beliefs along the lines of one party. They're disallowing the situation where someone can vote for one party to be in the executive branch and a different party to be in the legislative branch. And we say that this is a huge problem. Because let's say, for example, that I am a gay Republican living in California and I want to marry my civil partner. And so to do that, I know that I'll have to vote for the Democrats because they're the only ones who are going to give me that right. However, I have a completely different view when it comes to, say, the threat of Iran. And I think that the Republicans are the ones who should be dealing with that threat and taking a strong stance. And so what I will do is simply vote for a Democratic senator of California who will represent me in the parliament, and then vote for a Republican president. And when we allow that, it often ends up that we have a majority of Democrats in the Senate and a Republican president. And we think that's perfectly all right, because that allows people to represent themselves on different issues and freely express their opinions, without forcing them to align all their beliefs along the lines of one party, ladies and gentlemen. on. Now, we'll also go on later on in the case to explain why having a majority of one party why having a majority of one party in Congress and the other party in power doesn't undermine effective decision-making. We'll get to that later in the case. But for now, let's just summarize what we've heard so far. We've told you why we don't think the proposition's plan is really addressing the motion, but we're going to discuss it anyway. I showed you why it's really not fair to take away the power from the people in a democracy and put it all in the hands of the parliament. And finally, I showed you why sometimes it's important to have a majority of one party in the parliament and another party in power. For all these reasons, let the motions fall. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 15 seconds.
To continue the case for the proposition, we have a second speaker, Anya.
One thing can be said about the side of the opposition today. They truly weren't expecting our plan we have proposed. In our plan, we have clearly stated that the government, that the majority, that the minister or the prime minister of the government needs is the majority of the whole parliament. What they have been arguing on their side is that the prime minister should be of the leading party, that the prime minister and that the governing party and the governor, the governing minister, should be of the same party. But we have never ever said that. What we have been proposing in our plan, and what our first speaker so eloquently pointed out and explained, is that whether or not a prime minister should be prime minister should be decided by the parliament themselves, by all the people that are in parliament, no matter what kind of party they belong to. What they have to decide is who is going to lead them. And we have stated that they should give their consent. Who is going to be their leader? Who is going to be there for them when there are times when parties do not agree amongst each other? And who is going to be there for them? Who is going to take the stance when something is happening and when something has to be implemented? The side of the opposition hasn't been arguing why this is wrong, but has been arguing that, no, thank you, sir, why the system in the United States is just detrimental. They have never even taken a step outside of the United States. They were so focused, and they haven't been arguing our plan, but were arguing the plan of the Prime Minister and the governing party being of the same party. No, thank you. Now, to answer the point of democracy, what we have been saying is that people, when they are voting for the parliament, are voting for parties. That means for policies. And when they are voting for a leader, they are, yes, maybe voting for smiles. We did not say that people are only voting because of the smiles. But what we have said, and what Jean clearly explained, is that we will not ever, ever, ever take a risk to have an incompetent leader of the parliament simply because he had a better political campaign, was better looking, had a better smile. If we have a candidate that is more competent, with whom the whole parliament agrees and accepts him as a leader. This was our plan, and I would really, just a moment, sir, like to ask the opposition to start arguing on the cases of our plan. Yes, sir.
I ask again, where is this parliament's secret source of information that allows them alone to know who is the correct leader for the country and not the
Yes,
people?
thank you, sir. We are electing our politicians into the parliament because this is their job. We are electing them because we think that they are competent. Being a politician is a job, so as being a dentist, such as being a nurse, such as being a teacher. Being a politician is a job. And with us having the institution of a politician since the time of the Greeks, we have stated those are the people we are going to accept, those are the people who are going to us pass their votes to them, and those are the people that are going to decide instead of us. And as for your lovely point about diminishing all the democracy simply if we aren't voting for our prime minister, ladies and gentlemen, Slovenia does not vote for its prime minister. Hungary does not vote its prime minister. Many countries in the world do not have a vote for its prime minister. Even their lovely example of the United Kingdom does not vote for its prime minister, and yet all of those countries are doing perfectly fine. No, thank you. So we clearly see that their detrimental effects of not voting for the prime minister simply do not exist, because in today's world we aren't voting for the prime minister and nothing bad has happened. No, thank you, sir. So I believe I have clearly dealt with their arguments and with the line that the opposition have said and have re-established the correct line, the line that the government has presented. Now to continue with our third point of argumentation that we put on the government's case, that with the implementation of our plan, we would have an overall better decision-making process in the government. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the purpose of every government? The purpose of every government is to ensure that the state is working properly. So to do this, the government has to implement, discard, or keep certain policies to better the state of things inside the country. And to do so, we need the solutions to the problems the state is facing. And to do so, we need a good decision-making process. So let me just keep it on a scale. On one hand, you have a prime minister with whom the whole of the parliament does not agree, does not trust, and he or she has to lead the whole of the parliament in this decision-making process, should lead the sides, the parties that are disagreeing amongst each other to some common solution that will be best for the whole people. And of course, because the parliament does not trust him, this isn't working. The parties are constantly bickering, everything is, the responsibility is shifting from the prime minister to the parties, to the government. Nobody knows what is happening, nobody trusts anyone. But with the side of the government, with the proposition of the government, we have a prime minister that has been checked, that has been patted on the back by the whole of the parliament. That the parliament says, yes, we trust you to be our leader. We trust you to lead us when we are in times of discord, when we need someone to tell us, okay, come together and we will make a solution. And I clearly believe that the side of the government, the prime minister of the side of the government, is much better. Yes, sir?
We believe that the best decisions are made through negotiation, when the sides don't necessarily agree with each other from the beginning.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, exactly that. The best decisions are made through the negotiation. But the problem is who is chairing the negotiation. Somebody who will always side with one party, somebody that nobody trusts, or somebody that all the people in this room say, you are our superior, you are someone we can trust, you are someone that can lead us. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the prime minister of the side of the government, so I believe that points come to our side. What is the best institution that is currently doing so, that is currently appointing its head of government? It's the European Parliament. And you know what? In the European Parliament, almost 95% of all decisions are made by consensus, are made with everyone agreeing. And yes, this is the Parliament, this is the institution where the politicians themselves say, you are the person, you the Prime Minister, you the head of the government, are the person that is there to lead us. You are the person that is competent to help us through our phases of discord. What we need in our Prime Minister is not a big smile. What we need in our Prime Minister is a competent person that is going to help leads the parliament to successful decisions that is going to better the world, our state, our country, for every single one person of us. So what have I told you in my speech today? I have told you about what the real role of the Prime Minister is. I have told you that not voting for not having an elected Prime Minister is not detrimental for the state. And I have told you what is the role of the good Prime Minister and how what a good Prime Minister should be like and how he or she should work. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 6 seconds.
I would now like to introduce the second speaker for the opposition to continue their case, Badzio.
We find it peculiar that somehow there's a very arbitrary assertion made from the side of the proposition that when I vote for my senator, for my members of parliament, I'm a very competent voter. And then when I vote for my president, suddenly it all disappears, and all that is left is smiles. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been the core of their case, is this distinction that somehow when I vote for the parliament, we're very coherent and very sane, and it all just vanishes when we vote for our president. And this is the assertion their whole case is based on. And until they manage to prove that, they cannot win this debate. I'm going to get to a few issues of refutation before I talk about why decision-making is actually very effective and even more effective sometimes when the people are actually represented. So we talked about the definition, and we don't like it so much, but we're good sports, we're going to go ahead. But we do have a problem, a very serious problem with their plan. Moshe brought in a few arguments, and I'm going to add some more. What they're basically doing is giving Parliament veto power. They didn't say it because the word veto sounds undemocratic and a little scary. But that's what they're doing. They're giving them veto power. We have a few questions. We have actually 5 questions. The first is this idea of rationale of democracy. How can you completely undermine the people? Because the people know best. That's what democracy is based upon. The next is the fact that members of parliament can also be swayed. Because if the voters can be swayed, the members are human too. The third, no thank you, is that these people can vote in regular elections because they are human just like everyone else. And that's the other rationale of democracy, that everyone is equal. And no one has a veto power in democracies. The fourth issue we have to bring up, no thank you, is that members of parliament usually vote according to their own political interests. Let us remember that they're electing their boss. If any of us had that power to really elect our boss, then really, would we really be voting according to the best interest of the people, or really what's best interest for me? And the last question is, what happens? Because we heard, let's say the parliament isn't happy, and then they veto the president, and then what happens? We have re-elections, I assume, because nothing was addressed. And then if they don't like him again, then re-elections again, and re-elections again. We have some sort of disconnection, because obviously, the parliament don't want something that the people do. And we're really stuck, and there's no solution from side proposition how we get out of this gridlock. So unless we're going to be stuck in a cycle of re-elections, or unless they're going to actually enforce, no thank you, what the parliament says over the people, and actually tell the people, you have no opinion anymore, we really have to understand how this plan will work. And then I want to review 2 more issues that we heard from the proposition. So one of them, I want to clear up this idea that we don't vote for a prime minister and nothing bad happens. So first of all, I sincerely apologize for not understanding everything about Slovenian politics. We're going to go with what we understand. And what we understand is like this, that in most countries you do vote for the prime minister in one, no thank you, in one way or the other. Because the party elects the prime minister and then you elect him. And even if you don't, let's say, I'm sorry, let's say they're right. Let's say really in most places, you don't vote for the Prime Minister. So first of all, we say that's not justification. We brought in the rationale of democracy, and you brought in your own country. We really think that the rationale of democracy would outweigh that. We furthermore say that the fact is that what we heard is that we don't vote for a Prime Minister and nothing bad happens. And we're not very happy with nothing bad happens. We say that there's a lack of representation. There is an enforcement of the Parliament's opinions over the people, and that's a very big problem. Just because nothing bad happens is not really points to your side. The last issue I'm going to address before getting on to my points is this idea of consensus. And we say that really, if the people elected a president and the Parliament rejected him and therefore enforced consensus, then it's not a true consensus, because the consensus was enforced by shutting up a whole bunch of people. If I single in on one judge and say, you vote for me, and everyone else will have to leave the room, then clearly we'll win. But you can't call that a consensus, ladies and gentlemen. That is not what a consensus is. A consensus is when everyone agrees, and not when those who agree are great, everyone else is thrown out of the room. I'd like now to get on to my point, because my point will directly reflect what Anya spoke about, which is the decisions. She said no decisions will be made, and I'm going to tell you that they will be made, and that they will furthermore be better decisions. So first of all, what we have is like this. We have two sides, we have two people, we have the Parliament and we have the President, who both want to achieve things. They either want to make a change because they're really good politicians, they'll think, in a minute, or they're slightly more evil politicians and then they just want to stay in power. Yes?
You keep on talking about the Parliament and the President. We're talking about Prime Ministers, not the US government system.
I'm sorry. Well, if that's all the refutation you have for 4 minutes of a speech, then I will correct my language, and I guess you don't disagree with anything else. Prime Minister, I'm sorry. So around we have a Prime Minister and a Parliament. And really, they both want to get things done. We have two parties, and they all want to get things done, because they either want to make a change, and then you have to get things done to make a change, or they just want to stay in power. And to stay in power, to be elected again, you have to make a change. You have to have a resume and saying, this is everything I've done for you in 4 years, give me another 4. So we see that because there's a huge incentive for both parties to actually make differences, to actually go forward, decisions will be made in the end. And we furthermore say that really, if decisions aren't being made, let's say we have an issue that's really split. So the proposition solution is to get rid of some of the sides. But our solution is, we're saying, if it's so split, no thank you, the decision is so tough, then that's when we need representation. When everything's a consensus, when everyone agrees on something, let's say, for example, national security, then of course it's easy to get to a decision. But the tough decisions, no thank you, the ones that are split 5 million ways, that's when you need representation. And in those cases, that's when the proposition are taking away the representation by giving the Parliament a veto power. No thank you. So now I want to talk about why there's actually going to be more overall stability. Because we said that what happens is that in this kind of case, a president and a Parliament is going to have to work things out. They're not going to be able to just force their issues through. They're going to have to think about it. They're going to have to talk about it. Because what we say is, if President had an automatic majority, then really, he doesn't have to work his policies to make sure they include the other party. If I am, for example, a Republican Prime Minister with a Republican majority, then I can just force my issues through because there really is no sort of problem. I don't have to really care what the Democrats say, or what the other parties say in the UK. I'm sorry for focusing on the US. But really, under our plan, you actually have to take into consideration what happens on the other side. You have to actually wonder, what will the Democrats say about it? Because what's going to happen if I don't do that? The Democrats are going to come in 4 years and flip it all over. Only under our plan, only when there has to be, only when there is not a consensus, only when there's a really tough slugging it out for every law, that's when the laws are stable, because that's when we make sure the law works for as many people as we can. It can't work for everyone because we're not perfect. But under this system, when we're slugging it out, when we're having arguments, that's when you make sure the law fits for as many people as possible. And when that happens, then it's also as stable as possible. No one's going to come up and just flip it over the minute they can. And we furthermore say that also, if it just happens as a consensus, if the Republican majority who let's say, used their veto power, got rid of the president and got a new one, then really the people are being hurt because the people wanted that president. They had a reason. Because, for example, while they agreed on national security, they wanted to have, for example, gay marriage in their districts. And the Republican president does not agree with that. So what they have done is really take the people's opinions, who voted, who got out there on the voting election day, and said what they had to say, and it just suddenly doesn't matter anymore to the side of the proposition. And we really have to ask why, and that wasn't clearly answered by the side of the proposition. So let's go over what was said today. We really heard this arbitrary distinction between voters who are somehow really coherent when they vote for members of parliament and not when they vote for prime ministers. And again, I stress this, if they cannot explain that assertion, which is the core of their case, they cannot win today. And we furthermore say that really what they have done is enforce a consensus. They made it really easy for everyone to pass laws really quick, without really thinking about what other people say, without really wondering if really people don't agree with this. And we have a very big problem with that, because the whole point of democracy is that we're all equal. And the point of democracy is that we all have a say. And in no time ever, in no case, can the proposition get up, or can anybody get up and say, you voted on election day, but we somehow don't care anymore. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes.
I would now like to introduce the third proposition speaker, Philip.
Honorable panel of judges, what we're going to talk about in my speech are going to be two questions we have to answer. The first one is going to talk about democracy, whether the government's proposal does follow democracy, does follow the principles of democracy. And the second question we have to answer is, will we ensure a better life for our citizens, or in this case, for ourselves? Now, firstly, let's go talk about democracy. The opposition will want you to buy into the assertion that today democracy is all about each and every person raising their voice. Now, this might have been true in ancient Greece, when we had countries no bigger than 3,000 people living in them. Now, the second thing we want to talk about is democracy doesn't want people to decide for the sake of people deciding, but we follow the assertion that more ideas together bring a better solution. That is why we dissolve the power among the people in order to get as many voices in as we can to get a better solution. So the end goal of democracy is not ensuring that each and every person gets a say, but ensuring that we find the best solution possible. Now, let's talk about the United States of America, which they keep on talking about. We've talked about parliamentary democracies where we have prime ministers. Now, the opposition wants you to believe that the root of democracy, where democracy supposedly started in the United States of America, people have the most power. Now let's consider their governmental system. They have something what is called an electoral college. Because the founding fathers of the United States of America were aware of the fact that people tend to get swayed when deciding for one single person. And this is where we're going to attack the assertion between the difference of voting for a party and voting for the prime minister or the president. Now, what the electoral college has the power to do is to choose the president away from the vote of the people. The electoral college today can decide that even though the majority of the people voted for a Democrat as a president, they can decide to vote for a Republican. And that is how the country that deems itself so very democratical has an even harsher approach to taking power away from people. Now let's deal with the assertion that we vote differently when choosing parties and when choosing presidents. The first difference is when we choose prime ministers or presidents, we only vote for one person, which means that the personality of that sole person exudes itself much more. That the focus is much more on personality. When we vote for a party, we vote not for a person, but something taken away from people, something abstract, a party which follows its ideals. When we vote for a prime minister or a president, we vote for a human being. Which means that when we make our decisions, we relate to that human being in a more humanly manner. How does he make us feel? Does he smile? Does he seem like a nice guy? But when we vote for a party, we have something extremely abstract we have to relate to, and we relate to that party into a different sense. We relate to that party in a way, will this party, will this group of people ensure me getting what I want? Will this party follow my philosophy? And that is the main difference between voting one person and voting a party. Yes, madam.
But we have a House of Commons, we have a Senate, and those are people, real people with smiles too.
Yes, but again, when we have a party, we don't have all 200 people campaigning, waving hands, smiling. We have the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, the Communist Party. We have the party policies behind that. Now, let's get on with the democracy issue. Now, they here bring up the objection that members of the parliament will then have more voting rights than ordinary people. We say yes, because they already do. Because members of the parliament already do have the right to decide on health policies, on other policies, more than people do. Now, there's another thing we want to address here, is the tyranny of the many. Because they believe that as long as we ensure that the majority has the right vote, everything is going to be fine. We disagree with that point. Because we've got minorities having an extra representatives in certain EU countries, including Slovenia, including Hungary, including some other countries. We have the European Parliament taking in consideration the votes of the minorities. We've got minority representatives in Parliament, and in that logic, we could still argue that certain majorities have more power. Yes, they do, and that's the right thing to do. Because we see that overall, around the globe, the democratic system has some checks and balances set upon itself. And this is what we advocate for, and this is what leads us to the question, will we be able to make the best decisions? Now, before we get to that point, let's consider the 5 main objections the opposition has made, and let's review them again. The first one is that we don't follow democracy. We've dealt with that point. The second thing is that members of the parliament can be swayed. We've answered that point. That is their profession. They have decided they're going to give their job, give their professional time in order to serve the people in the best way they can. No, thank you. They decided that they want to make certain decisions, and that's a huge difference between the ordinary people that want the best representative or the people that are actually the representatives. They have not answered that objection. No, thank you. They believe that MPs can vote and that gives them more power. We've dealt with that contention. Now, the fourth thing is that they believe that members of the parliament will vote in their best interest. Will vote for the person that will guide them in the best way possible. Yes. Yes. Members of the parliament will choose that person that will be able to lead that whole parliament as a group to make the best decisions possible. Yes. Now, they make this fifth claim about how we're throwing people out of the decision-making process when we're actually not. What we're saying is that when an incompetent person comes into parliament to lead it, we believe we have each and every right to deny that person to come in. And they believe we'll get caught in numerous re-elections, but until they prove that point, then people will re-elect again and again and again and again and again and again the bad person. We believe that that serves as a vote of no confidence for the whole government. So apparently there's something wrong with the balance between what the governments want and what the people want. And we believe that's another check that ensures balance between the people and the government. Yes, go.
Or maybe there's something wrong with your system that allows this small group of people to cancel out the will of the entire nation.
Okay, so the opposition has a problem with our system when it allows that the dissatisfaction of the people is clearly seen. Now, and they believe that that is a problem of a system that is supposedly ensuring democracy. What we say is that each and every objection that they make that shows how people are dissatisfied with the government serves our purpose because that improves the democracy. Now, will we get the right people? I think we've already dealt with the point that people do tend to get swayed. If I may use the words of one of the first rhetoric scholars, Quintilian. He said this: there are 2 kinds of speaker on this planet. One speaker will finish his speech and people will go, yes, that's a good speaker, that's a nice guy. And we believe that is how people vote for for prime ministers and presidents. The other kind of speaker will step off and people will think, yes, we have to adopt that policy because that policy is something that will give us something good. Now, psychological studies have proven that people when they consider one person, are more inclined to vote for the first speaker. We want the people in our government to be the speakers that would make the right decisions for the sake of right decisions, and not for them being nice guys. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 18 seconds.
I would now like to call upon the third opposition speaker, Benny.
The burden of proof that was on side proposition was to prove a significant enough harm that we throw out the entire rationale of the democracy that the people get to choose their leader. Because let me stress, they try to muddy the water here a bit by saying in Slovenia we don't choose our leaders directly, the parliament we have a parliament and we just vote for parties. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, but we know who the leader is going to be of that party that we voted for. When we vote for that party, we know that the party that I voted for, if that leader is elected into power, if that party is elected into power, he will become the leader. I don't vote for a party and then suddenly the other guy gets into power. This doesn't happen anywhere under status quo. It doesn't matter whether or not we're talking about the United States, we're talking about Slovenia, we're talking about Britain, or we're talking about Israel. Everywhere the people have the right to choose their leader. They get the options in front of them, whether it's 2 or whether it's 4, and then they choose their leader. What they had to prove was there was such a huge harm under status quo that we're allowed to just give the parliament veto power. But from now on, the MPs are allowed to veto the decision of the people, and this is strictly against the rationale of status quo, and exists nowhere in the world today. So, ladies and gentlemen, do people vote for the right reasons? That's the first question I'm going to ask you here today. The second question is, what are MPs allowed to vote on? Because they said MPs are allowed to vote on taxes, therefore MPs should be allowed to elect the next leader of the free country. The third thing I'm going to ask you is finally the harms versus benefits. Because they showed us very few benefits in their plan, and we didn't actually understand harm more than the fact that maybe electeds get needed sometimes because people like them smiling more. But which leads me to my first question. Do people vote for the right reasons? Now let's make something very clear. The rationale of every democracy is that, yes, people aren't stupid. People want to do what's in their best interest. And that most people out there, when voting, no thank you sir, if the choice is between someone with a nice smile and, let's say, bad policies which will harm me, my living, and will put my country at war with countries I don't want to go to war with, and someone who, no thank you, might have a slightly dour face, but on the other hand actually have good policy that I will see will benefit me, people will make the right decision. If they think that, no thank you, people don't have this ability to have this choice, people are so irrational, no thank you, that they can't make these decisions, then they need to do away, no thank you, with elections overall. Because, you know, people are so stupid, ladies and gentlemen, they only vote for people because of smiles. And this is, no thank you, asserted time and time again on their side, that people vote for people because of their smile. But ladies and gentlemen, sometimes people vote for people because they're strong leaders. And really, I want my leader to be strong. Part of that might be that he's charismatic. Yes, this is part of the decision-making process that people have to make, but it's part of it. It's not like I either choose people because they smile, or I choose people because they have good policy. Really, I want the person who had the combination. Yes, ma'am.
If that is so, then the parliament will simply say, yes, this person is a great leader, yes, we want it as a real leader of our parliament, and everything will...
Okay, then why do we need this extra step from your plan? Why do we need to leave it up to chance, ladies and gentlemen, that the parliament might not do it? If you're agreeing with our side that people do make the right decision, then why can't the people make the right decision? No, thank you, and not the parliament. And are we addressing what the parliaments do and how politics get involved when we let them do it instead? And the final thing, ladies and the second thing here is why, when I vote and go and I vote for my senator, do I vote like completely rationally and I'm completely normal, as opposed to when I vote for my president? And what we heard, the analysis that we heard on this side is, well, it's because it's personal. Because when I vote for my senator, I'm voting for a party, and when I vote for my politician, when my president, I'm voting for a direct person. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, we say this is not true. Because a lot of countries in the world today, when you vote for the person who you're going to vote into power, you do it based on a district, and yes, there are local campaigns and local districts of the people you're going to vote in power. And even, ladies and gentlemen, in examples such as Israel, when you have the MPs, they release a list of the people who are going to be their MPs, and they say, this is our people, this is our people, this is our people, and people do go and vote for them, and these people go out and campaign for that party. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is still this personal attraction, and more than that, ladies and gentlemen, we again don't think that people are so stupid that only because there's a personal attraction, they would vote for them. And more than that, ladies and gentlemen, even if they were, no thank you, that stupid, well maybe if someone is quite a lot like me, and I empathise with him quite a lot, he might make a good leader for me because he's quite a lot like me, ladies and gentlemen. This is part of the rationale that people get to make. So, ladies and gentlemen, do people vote for the right reasons? Yes, of course they do. And if they didn't, well then, why are we giving them voting power anyway? It's just silly. No thank you. And the second question I've got to ask, what are MPs allowed to vote on? Ladies and gentlemen, they're allowed, they go and they say, we will either raise taxes or lower taxes, ladies and gentlemen. And if I vote for the people who say they want to raise taxes, they can't then turn around and say, we're going to lower taxes. This isn't what they get to do. What we get to let them do is the nitty-gritty decision-making, which, right, people don't know everywhere in the world today whether tax should be raised by 3%, by 4%, by 5%. They don't have this knowledge, right? But they do know, ladies and gentlemen, what they want. They do know the general thrust of what they want. That's why we have representative democracy, to then handle out these little stipulations. But you can't turn around once you've voted someone in, once you've voted a policy, and then go against the will of the people, which is what they're suggesting. Because they're saying people will go against party lines, no thank you sir, and they could vote in someone who is against power. And we say this is not legitimate, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't legitimate for MPs to vote in someone, one second sir, who people don't want. Yes?
You yourself have given examples of exemplary democracies. How come each and every of those democracies has got safeguards against the stuff that we're...
Because I just explained to you that the examples of democracy, you vote in the people, you vote in the leader, ladies and gentlemen, while you vote in the party itself. It's not, ladies and gentlemen, that you vote in the party and then suddenly they choose the leader of the opposition party to rule. This isn't what happens, ladies and gentlemen. And, ladies and gentlemen, let's really look what happens when we leave it down to the MPs to rule. Well, here's what the MPs have, which the people don't have. The first is base politics. Every single campaign you might have heard about, Obama, McCain, is that there's too much politics going in Washington, too much slapping people on the back, too many friends involved, ladies and gentlemen, too many conflicting interests. I'm electing in my next boss. Of course I have a huge political interest on who I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to do it on what's best for the people. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, they came into power, they came into a power for a reason because they want to do stuff. But they also have personal interest. They have a huge amount of personal interest, and this is how we see, no thank you, that a lot of governments go slightly iffy, ladies and gentlemen, when these people start ignoring people, and this is why we vote them out of power. And more than that, ladies and gentlemen, what about lobby groups? What about huge interest groups that there are around? Because if all I have to do is go and buy 20 senators and go and offer them really good, good dinners and good policies, and we see, ladies and gentlemen, that this happens because they then go and vote for these companies' bills, the lobby groups, get to vote in the leader of that country. The people are left out of this entirely. It's left only in the thing of the political, very, very political elite and the people who are rich enough to buy it off. And we say, no. So what are the harms versus benefits? So they said, ladies and gentlemen, the minorities are better represented. We didn't understand this, because under any plan, every single list in the government, ladies and gentlemen, probably has minorities on it. And if the minorities aren't on this parliamentary list, then they don't get voted in and they vote for someone else. And more than that, ladies and gentlemen, but the harm, people will stop voting. There's this huge incentive for people to stop, disincentive for people to vote if they know that their decision isn't made. People stop voting when they feel that they can make no difference, when they feel that their vote has no effect. This is what they're saying. Your vote for who gets to lead the country, the most important decision for any person, you don't get to do that. I won't show up to vote. Thank you very much.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 14 seconds.
I now call on Moshe to give the opposition replies.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to be here. All right. At the end of today's debate, we realized that the proposition came forth and attempted to prove something really quite simple. They attempted to prove that the power to elect a nation's leader should be taken away from the people and put in the hands of the parliament. Now, we were surprised when they got up and told us that that's what they were going to prove, because we didn't really think that's what the motion meant, but we went on and discussed it anyway. And now, at the end of today's debate, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over the cases that were discussed on both sides and show you why, in the end, the proposition's plan falls. The reason for that is basically that in order to justify their solution, they presented us with two main problems with the status quo, two main dangers that they wanted to address. Now, the main issue that they wanted to deal with was, first of all, that people elect silly leaders. Now, I'm just going to say, before even moving on to the second issue, that people, according to them, only elect these silly leaders in national elections and in no other kind of election, and also that the definition of a silly leader, of a foolish leader, is simply that the parliament doesn't like that leader. So that was the first problem. The second problem they also tried to deal with was that when the parliament doesn't agree with the leader who's in power, then they often have trouble coming to decisions. And now we refuted this in our case, and we didn't really hear a convincing answer on their side, but I'll be discussing it anyway. Now to get on to the first problem, which is really the crux of this debate. We heard that there's a very serious problem, that people today, when electing a national leader, are swayed by personality, are swayed by looks, and not by policies. And ladies and gentlemen, as we just heard, we didn't really understand why this is so. Why are people so naive and so superficial that they elect a leader only based on his looks? We don't really understand why that's true. So that's the first problem we had with that. But even beyond that, we at the end of the debate, we still have 4 central questions about this plan that remain unanswered till the very end. The first question, once again, deals with the rationale of democracy. The rationale of democracy clearly states, and I'm sure we're all tired of hearing this by now, that the people should have power, ladies and gentlemen. That the people should be in control of who governs and leads their nation. And how does the proposition's plan directly conflict with this? It's because it takes a very small group of people, the people in Parliament, who have their own personal ideas, their own personal issues, their own personal desires, and it gives them the ability to step in and cancel out the people's choice. And that's against democratic ideals. Second question, why do people elect their representatives in Parliament correctly? Why do they make a good decision then, but then suddenly when going to vote for their national leader lose all their good sense? Ladies and gentlemen, that's another contradiction, another case that they haven't addressed. The third question is that why is the fact that politics is these parliament members' job? Simply because they work in politics, why did that make them qualify now to choose their own boss against the will of the entire nation, ladies and gentlemen? And finally, a question that still remains unanswered is what happens if the proposition plan actually goes into effect and we give the government this power, the parliament this power. What we told you that would happen is that we'd go into an endless cycle of elections because the people would choose a leader. The parliament wouldn't like him, the people wouldn't be willing to give up on their leader, but the parliament still wouldn't like him, and so there'd be elections after election after elections. We never heard an answer to this quandary. And just to finally sum up with the second problem, they told us that we might have trouble making decisions if the situation arose, but Batzion clearly explained why both sides in this kind of negotiation have a very strong motivation to come to a decision, because they want to show their voters that they made a difference. We never heard a convincing answer from the proposition why the decisions would not be made. So at the end of today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, we still need to ask, why is the proposition stepping in and changing the principles of democracy? Why should the people not be allowed to choose the leader that they want? Thank you.
Speaking time was 4 minutes and 12 seconds.
To conclude, I would now like to call on Zan to give the proposition.
When I was just a little boy, my mother once told me that a big smile can add a lot of clarity to any situation. So that's what I want to do with this reply speech. With a smile, add a lot of clarity to this debate. And I want to do that by taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of this debate and looking at the principles behind it. We see that we need to address two issues. Firstly, the principles of democracy, and secondly, governmental effectiveness. So firstly, we have the principles of democracy, and we have side opposition in this debate, who says the power should only be in the hands of the people. Now, firstly, the people in parliament are people. Secondly, we, as the people, elect those people in parliament who then elect, when we elect the person, and then elect them to be. So actually the decision is still in our hands. The only thing side proposition is doing today is creating a safety net. A safety net for that 0.0% where the people are not electing the right person. A safety net for that 0.0% when the people, us, are not in control, are swayed by big smiles, are swayed by big talks. And that is a chance side proposition is not willing to take. When they say you're taking away our power, we're saying we're not taking it away. We're just adding more power. We're just adding more power for the system to choose the right people, for the system to choose the best people to give us a better tomorrow. And that is what side proposition today is doing. Not taking away power, but giving power. Giving power to our system, to our people, to actually ensure that the right people get in place. Because side proposition today is not willing to take the risk. And when they say, we need all the power, we say we already give up that power by saying we don't know everything. So we'll elect people who will decide about our healthcare, who will decide about our education. Side proposition advocate that who leads those people is just as important. And they should have a say in the parliament of who should be the head. And when we talk about, secondly, the governmental effectiveness, we have side proposition who said that these governments have a leader. They have a leader who will be the chairperson, who will lead them. Either that's the prime minister or the president, the head. And what we said, which was never fully rebutted from side opposition, is that the effectiveness of the entire governmental system increases if we allow the parliament in itself to actually choose the right person, to choose the person that they believe would be the best for the job. And that is what side opposition today is clearly not willing to see, that we're increasing the effectiveness, we're increasing the actual ability of our parliament to do the best they can. And when they say we can't allow a small group of people to have veto power, we're saying that we're giving them that veto power, even if it isn't really a veto power in the manner that side proposition today is proposing, because it's the right thing to do. Because we don't want a pretty boy or a pretty girl today to be the leader of our government. If they're pretty and they have what it takes to be a leader, the parliament will acknowledge that and they'll be the leader. But if they're just another pretty face, side proposition today does not want to accept that. We want the best people. We want the people who will decide in our best interest. And that is what side opposition today is regretting. So when taking a step back and deciding who to vote for today, think about the risks. Think about the risks of having the wrong person in the biggest seat of a government. That is the risk side proposition today is extinguishing. Thank you.
Speaking time was 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Thank you.